Hello and welcome. This is Chuck Hardwick Jr. and today is Wednesday, May the 13th, 2020. And I'm on a Zoom call with my dad, Chuck Hardwick Sr. I'm in my home office in Ocean Beach neighborhood of San Diego, and my dad's in his home in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida. And welcome to episode 9, Sylvania. And Dad, how are you today?
Doing great, son. Always good to see you.
Well, it's great to see you too. And first of all, give us your latest thoughts on what's going on with this horrible pandemic.
Well, the way things have changed, I had an appointment with my ophthalmologist at the University of Miami Medical School. They have a branch in Palm Beach Gardens. And they called me to say that he was canceling it, but that I could come and see a technician who would do the eye pressure checks that people have to keep guarding against glaucoma, and to do a regular eye check. And then the doctor would call me later with the results. And it used to take me 2 to 3 hours to go over to their institute and have that done. And they said, well, allow at least 30 minutes. And I thought, well, that's fine. I'm very happy to allow 30 minutes instead of 2 to 3 hours. Makes you wonder how many other changes are going to be as a result of the pandemic, not only in medicine, but in so many other ways. And certainly telemedicine is going to be here to stay. It's now being used so widely. Insurance companies are reimbursing for it. I think that's a strong wave of the future.
Hopefully they'll pass along some of those savings to the consumer. I suspect maybe they'll charge the same and just increase their profit margin, but I guess you won't know until you see the bill, if you ever do see the bill. But anyway, let's get back to episode 9, and let's spin our time machine back to the year 1968, and tell us what was going on in terms of your career at about that time.
Well, we've been living in Lisle, working in Chicago as a district hospital manager. I was offered a promotion as district manager of the Toledo district. I was very excited about that, moving into management officially. But I was not anxious to leave Lisle. I enjoyed living there. I enjoyed working in Chicago. You kids seem to like it as well. I'd also had my first spark of politics. I've been told many people that I was a volunteer for Nixon. We were in the volunteer office calling people to turn out for a big parade he was going to have, riding in an open car down some main street in Chicago. But I enjoyed that whole involvement, being part of something bigger than my everyday life and my everyday job. I wasn't able to attend the parade for some reason, but it was highly successful, big turnout, and I had a smile of feeling like, well, I did something good there. I was part of something worthwhile there. Also, at that time in Chicago, the Democratic National Convention was being held, and it was a nightmare for the Democrats. What a year. Hubert Humphrey had not come out against the war enough. He was caught between college students and anti-war people versus LBJ, and the campaign was in a lot of trouble as a result of that. So Nixon was pretty much unchallenged as a Republican. There was another candidate that year, George Wallace, who carried, I think, a half a dozen states in the Deep South, pulled away votes that probably would have been mostly Nixon votes. Nixon still won the majority of votes, not by much, but have an overwhelming win in the Electoral College. So it was an interesting experience in my kind of introduction to real politics. So we went to Toledo, Ohio, started a new phase in our life.
And that was based on a promotion that you had received from Pfizer, wasn't it?
It was a promotion. So we sold the house in Sylvania that I had trouble paying $22,000 for.
Wait. So you sold the house in Sylvania?
The house in Lisle. Excuse me, I'm getting ahead of myself. Sold the house in Lisle, which there it is. Nice yard, big backyard. We enjoyed the house a lot. It's relatively small, only a bath and a half. But we sold that for $27,000. So in the course of a year, we cleared $5,000, which was half of a year's salary, tax-free. So that was nice to have. And use that money and put it down as a down payment on a new house in Sylvania, which we paid, my recollection is $37,000 for, which was a big jump. You might have a picture of that house as well.
Is
Yeah,
that the
there
one?
it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, that house was 2 years old. It was a Ryan home in a new development, a suburb of Toledo. Very nice house with a large fireplace, 2.5 baths, 3 bedrooms, and you and Ginger seem to like that a great deal.
I remember that house well. And so you got promoted. What were some of the new challenges of your position, and how did you like your new role? And tell us more about your actual work there in Northwest Ohio area.
Well, the district had 10 sales reps, and I was the day-to-day management of them and manager of them. My job really was to take what was coming down from headquarters in the way of how do we promote our products, translate that, explain it, I give examples of it, and then work with the salesmen. I usually worked with them 4 days a week and then spent Friday as an office and administrative day. The main thing I had to first do was sell myself. And I found this in a lot of jobs as I was promoted. There were people there who had been there for a long time, a little resentment. I know the district hospital rep who was my peer when I was a district hospital rep in Chicago, wanted to be the district manager, understandably. But I was there, had the job, had to sell myself and then energize the district. We had some sales reps who were energetic, and we had some who had been there a long time, and their whole objective was just to meet their quota, don't do too much, don't go over quota because it might raise your quota for next year. So it had the typical challenges of a sales district. Went from Toledo south, not sure, I think down to Lima, Ohio, up into Michigan, out towards Kalamazoo and western part of Michigan, down to South Bend, Indiana. I think Notre Dame was it was inside the district. So it was the heart of mid-America. I enjoyed the job a lot.
So were you in charge of hiring and firing? Were there anyone you had to let go of, or did you have to bring in some new people as the company grew?
Well, yes, I was first line in charge of it. Didn't have the final say, but pretty much I would present the candidates that I wanted to hire. And if I had to let someone go for some reason, I would explain it to the regional manager. I mean, one rep I remember I had to let go. You had to turn in receipts for your gasoline for your company car. And I was reviewing his expense report, and he had about 5 or 6 receipts, but they were all numbered consecutively. And I said, wait a minute, these receipts all came off at once. And I remember saying, what is this? So to what extent are you padding your expense account with fake receipts? And he said something like, well, okay, you caught me. I've been doing it. And so it just soured the whole relationship. And I said, I think you ought to find another job. And he said, yes, I understand. So that wasn't easy because I kind of like the guy, but it's, part of the job. Then I remember getting a call from my regional manager saying, our region needs to hire more African Americans. We're not really recruiting them well enough. And I said, well, his name was Gray Collier. I said, well, Gray, I would. I'd be happy to, but I just haven't found any qualified African Americans. He said, well, I don't know. He said, check them. Maybe I need a new district manager in Toledo who would be better at recruiting. I said, well, let me give it another try. And I hired an African American who was really very, very good. In fact, I went to an employment agency for some help, and he was the counselor for the employment agency, and I ended up hiring him. We had to give the company he worked for some money because we hired him, not somebody he was going to find. He was a great guy, Earl Gregory, and ended up with a very tragic ending. One morning after I was gone, I had moved on to New York. He was driving across a bridge in Ohio, and it was a foggy morning, so the fog's laying near the ground, and he was on the Ohio Turnpike, and he saw a car accident. The car was burning. He saw it on the other side, so he got out of his car and went across the median strip in order to go and help the other car. Because it was foggy, he didn't realize he was on a bridge, and that in the middle was a drop down, a very deep drop. And he ran over and jumped over the mediumship and fell to his death. Very tragic loss. He was really a hero. That shows you the kind of quality person that he was. And he done a good job. It was very tragic.
Wow, that's so sad. But let's shift gears a little bit and tell us a little bit more about sort of your personal life and what you did for fun. I know you mentioned a little bit of political activity when we lived in Lisle. Did that continue? What did you do in your spare time? And
the spark when politics didn't go out. I ran for Republican committeeman in Sylvania and got elected. And it was an interesting concept because whatever party was in control in Ohio, Republicans or Democrats, that party controlled the licensing of liquor stores throughout the state. So when there was a Republican in the state house, then the Republican Party selected who was going to be the liquor dealer in Sylvania. When it was a Democrat in the state house, the Democrats did. So we had something to say about that. And so it became actually an interesting part of politics. It added some life to party structure. I remember the pharmacy in town was, I don't remember whether that was a Republican or Democrat. And then there was another store, some kind of other retail store. And the liquor license would change back and forth depending upon which party. But an interesting part of that was a fellow Republican said, there's a big meeting in Columbus. Why don't we go down? It was a Republican meeting of some kind. So he and I went down and he said, Senator Robert Taft is upstairs or he's running for the Senate. He's a congressman. Why don't we go up and say hello? And we were on the early side. We went upstairs, knocked on the door of his suite, and opened the door and said, Mr. Taft, we're here and we'd like to meet you. Oh, please come in. He said, come on in. He was there. And his wife said, oh, welcome, guys. And she was moving about at a suite. I remember he opened a bottle of Cutty Sark Scotch and said, come on in and sit down and have a drink. And he talked about the issues, and he was running in a Republican primary against Jim Rhodes. And we talked for a while. And I sat there thinking, wow, this is great. His dad was known as Mr. Republican, U.S. Senator on a national level, ran for president. His granddad was former President Taft. And I thought, my dad worked at Wonder Bread. And this politics is pretty good. You meet some interesting people. And he said, Chuck, would you work on my Senate campaign? He said, I need you to do that up in Sylvania. I said, yes, sir, Mr. Taft. You got me, not only my vote, I'll go out and help you get elected. So that was a new political experience. First time I'd really interacted with a political bigwig. And it kind of stayed with me. It showed some upward mobility you can have in America through politics. And certainly we've seen that with a lot of other politicians today.
Well, that's pretty cool. What did you do for his campaign? Was it knocking on doors or telephone banking, or what kind of activities were involved?
We didn't do as much telephoning as is done now. Mostly knocking on doors, distributing literature, putting up signs in the yard. I was not an insider. I was not making strategic calls or anything like that. But he did win his primary and went on to be a United States Senator for 6 years in the famous Taft family. And years later, when his son, who's more my age, became governor and I was doing government affairs for Pfizer, I met his son, and as I did most Republican governors and a lot of Democratic governors, and told him the story. He enjoyed hearing the story about me interacting with his mom and dad back in the early days.
So what did your boss or other people at Pfizer think about your being involved in politics? Did you discuss these kinds of things with them? And if so, did they encourage you to continue doing some political activities, or what sort of reaction?
At that early stage, no, because I wasn't really doing anything that was really serious that would be any influence on my job. But hold that question for when I was getting serious, because we had some real interesting discussions, and uh, good decision by Pfizer years later.
Your boss may have been more concerned about the performance of your district, and I know you did well as a detail man. How did you do with that first management job? Was there some sort of a quota for the 10 guys or people that
Absolutely,
work?
there was a quota, and we did very well. We contributed to the region winning an award, and I recall your mom and I, as part of the celebration, were invited back to Chicago for a weekend of with the women shopping and the men. I don't remember what we did, played cards or something. And the women had a good time. We did. We celebrated, got trophies, got gifts, and I got a nice letter back from the regional manager. At the time, but he knew I was being promoted then to leave that job and move on to my next promotion. And that came about in an interesting way. The company had a district manager project program where you were invited into headquarters, and then headquarters, you were given some kind of an assignment. My assignment was to determine the appropriate price for a new product. We were working on an injectable penicillin called carbenicillin. And that was the ostensible purpose of your being there. But the real purpose was for them to evaluate you. So we had medical exams, executive physicals, which uncovered a lung disease that I was treated for later. We had psychological exams, spent a couple hours with a psychologist or psychiatrist probing deep into motivations and tell me your life story, tell me what you want to do. And then we had the actual project. Well, my project supervisor was a man named Bill Steer, who came from another division, been in international, but was in charge of my project. And he said, he was interested in what I'd done. And he actually said, this is the best project I've ever seen from a district manager. Would you come in and work with me in marketing?
Wow.
And I declined to do that. By the way, he later became the CEO and chairman of the board of Pfizer.
Well, why would you decline? Why would you? That sounded like it'd be right up your alley. You had the marketing background from Florida State. Why did you decline that opportunity?
Well, I think it would have been, and that's a good question. First of all, there was some friction between sales and marketing. Larry Larkin, who I've talked about earlier, and Steer were a little bit at odds. And my loyalties went with Larry Larkin because sales and Larkin and I were buddies, that kind of thing. I thought that we were. And moving to New York scared me a bit. I was just I was a little scared, I guess, for lack of word. But also things were going really well in Sylvania. We had a happy life there. You and Ginger had a dog you were happy with. We were active in church. I was considering running for town council in Sylvania. Oh, they celebrated. There's a picture of you and Ginger with, she's holding the dog, and you're celebrating our first Christmas there. It was a good family life. I see you playing with Frisbee in the front yard, probably with Ginger. There's a cute picture of you with the dogs.
What was that dog's name? Do you remember?
Checkers. And do you know where the name came from?
I don't. Why don't you fill us in on that?
That was President Nixon's dog of his, the name of his dog. And when he was being nominated to run for vice president with Eisenhower and accused of wrongdoing, he gave what was called the famous Checkers speech, where he said people were criticizing him, and the only thing he'd ever accepted as a politician was a puppy named Checkers. And his children loved that dog, and he was not giving it back. He didn't care. He didn't care how much people criticized him. He was not going to break his little girl's heart by taking that dog.
Sorry, I took us a little off course based on those photos, but you were telling us about, so you declined the position in New York, but then somehow we ended up in that neck of the woods anyway. What happened after that?
Well, I declined that position, and we went back to Westfield and resumed, to Sylvania. resume the good life. And another factor was I was getting geared up to run for Sylvania Town Council. I had a real life going there, and Republican committeeman, potential candidate, met the senators.
So would you be the guy running the liquor store then if you had won that?
But I would be the guy who would have a say on who got the liquor license. And then I got a call from Larry Larkin saying, I understand you weren't interested at that time in coming into the marketing, but would you be interested in a promotion as assistant regional manager? You would still be in the sales department, and it would be in New Jersey working with a regional manager there, certainly a stepping stone. We're promoting 7 district managers from around the country. You would be one of them. I'd love to have you accept that job. And so I said, well, I'll get back to you in a couple of days. And I did. And one thing that's also on my mind, that lung disease called sarcoidosis, it was not clear what the prognosis was going to be. It upset me a bit that I was told, well, you're now uninsurable. You can't get life insurance with sarcoidosis. Well, obviously, it wasn't a good decision by the insurance companies, because now I'm nearly 80 and I still haven't died. So sarcoidosis was treated and went into submission. So I had a lot going in my mind, but I accepted the promotion. It was called regional operations manager, which really meant you were assistant regional manager. So time to pack up and move again. We did that. We moved to Westfield. I accepted the promotion, moved to Westfield, New Jersey. And I'm sure you remember that very well.
I do. And why did you pick Westfield as a place to shop for a house?
Well, that's a good question. Your mom and I, we first looked in a town called Summit, which is a great town. Summit was a little expensive, but I wanted to be in the area where I could also have access to Seton Hall Law School, nearby law school. They had an evening program. I thought eventually someday I may be working in New York. So I wanted to be in a commuter town so I could get in New York. And my immediate job as assistant regional manager was in Clifton. So I would be driving to Clifton. And so if you look at a triangle on a map, it's a pretty logical place to be. Westfield was a beautiful town. And the personnel manager in Pfizer that had our division, Joe Compton, lived in Westfield. And he said, well, let me take you out there. He said, let me show you Westfield. And very nice of him, took me out, showed me, we drove around, showed me Westfield. And I said, yes, this would be a very nice place to live, good place to raise Ginger and Chucky. And so Pat and I agreed, we found a home which cost the same as we sold Sylvania for, where I paid $37,000. We sold Sylvania for $48,500 a year and a half later. So that was a $10,000, that was a year's salary, you know, it's $10,000 gain in real estate. And I paid only, I think, about the same in Westfield. But it shows you being a white family in white collar jobs. I wasn't buying and selling real estate to make money on it, but we certainly did. We were lucky. We bought nice homes, and you can see the progression, and it accumulated an equity that a lot of non-white families just wouldn't have access to. The very first one, which was federal FHA loan. And I'm very, very much aware of that, of the privileges that we had.
Well, that really was a great house on Dixon Drive. The proximity, not only to the elementary school, Tamaqua Elementary, but Tamaqua Park, where I played Frisbee and tennis and baseball and basketball, rode my bike, and then also walking distance to the junior high and the high school, great schools in Westfield. It really was a fine place to grow up, and have nothing but fond memories of that part of my life until I moved to Tallahassee in 1980.
It was, and I had a lot of great bosses at Pfizer. I had 2 different district managers, actually 3 different district managers, and 2 different regional managers. I liked them all, worked hard for all of them. And I ran into my first difficulty with a manager that I reported to, and that was the regional manager where I was the assistant regional manager. And he resented me. I felt he was a good old boy from Louisiana, and we kind of clashed. I think he resented my graduate degree and resented the fact that Larry Larkin, his boss, and I struck up a good relationship. And when I came in as assistant regional manager, he had a district manager that he wanted to be his assistant regional manager. And headquarters said, no, we got Chuck Hardwick. So we never really clicked. And it was unfortunate. It didn't really work out too well for either of us. And that resulted then in Larry Larkin bringing me into headquarters as his assistant. And so after about a year or so, I started commuting into New York. In the meantime, I taken the LSAT, the law school aptitude test, passed it, had applied and was admitted to Seton Hall. And then Joe Compton, the personnel manager, said, you know, why would you want to go to law school? We can hire all the lawyers we want. You're on a fast track here. You've been recognized for your capabilities. You got a good job. Stay right where you are and work hard. You move up here. Going to law school is just a diversion. And I think he was right. He talked me out of it. And so I didn't obviously go to law school, but resulted then in moving my job into New York. And we can pick it up from there for another story.
Well, that sounds really good, Dad. It was so good to hear about that part of our lives. And I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. It's been a lot of fun today. And I look forward to talking about some other things that happen in the next episode.
Same here, Chuck. And thanks for your time and interest in handling all the technical aspects of Zoom calls.
It's my pleasure. I hope you have a great day, Dad. Love you.
You do the same. Love you. Bye-bye.
Bye, Dad.